Once two lifelong friends graced a buddy read of the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. Toss 5 stars to our podcast, Internet of Plenty, Internet of Plenty, oh. Toss 5 stars to our podcast, Internet of Plenty.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Who is that lovely, lovely voice, Charles?
Someone who picked up a new hobby during the shutdown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. That intro can only mean one thing, and that is that we are here today to talk more Witcher. Who is the we that we're talking about? Well, my name is Charles, and my host with me today is none other than Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
All right, me as well. So, our topic today, we're doing one of our special little micro topic episodes. We hope you enjoy it. This one is called The Witcher and What Makes a Monster.
We're gonna finally answer the question, Charles. You and I apparently know the answer, and all these listeners, they're gonna find out, right, Charles? That's what we're doing.
It's not so much about answering the question as much as it is extrapolating on this theme across what we know and have read from The Witcher. You know, I've read the whole series. Dylan has watched the show and read The Last Wish. So we might have some light spoilers for The Last Wish, which is the first Witcher book, but everything else you'll be totally fine with. And that's your spoiler warning.
And light spoilers for the Netflix series.
Yes, but light.
We'll keep it light.
Keep it light. So, yeah, back to the title. What makes a monster? One of my favorite things about the Witcher stories is, you know, Geralt, on his face value, he's a monster bounty hunter. You give him money and he goes out and kills a monster. But as we've talked about in our Last Wish episode and in our Witcher series episode, he doesn't always follow that. He has a very strong moral code, and he's sometimes sympathetic to monsters or creatures if they've done no wrong or if they're not posing a threat to anybody. And another thing that Andrzej Sapkowski does that's really interesting is when he's writing a monster, a lot of times it's typically something as the result, it's like a monster that has been man-made or is the result of some evil acts done by man. So this idea of a monster, more often than not, monsters get a lot of sympathy from Geralt, and it's the men that create them through their evil deeds is the true horror and the true monster of the story.
Well said, Charles. I think that's one of the biggest themes in The Witcher throughout. I mean, most of the entities in the story that are causing trouble or creating these awful situations that often monsters in the more typical sense are embroiled in some way are it's the people who've caused things to go that way in The Witcher.
Right, because we just finished our Lord of the Rings buddy reads, and there's all kinds of monsters. There's Shelob, there's the Balrog, there's the Guardian, that giant octopus monster that's guarding the gates to Moria, and they're all just pure animalistic, like violent, evil creatures. But in Witcher, more often than not, like monsters are created through like magic, or they don't exist at all, and it's just the influence of human beings trying to make Geralt kill people for them, right? So that's what gives The Witcher its unique spin and its unique twist and making it worth reading in the first place is Andrzej Sapkowski's talent of taking the idea of a monster and kind of deconstructing it and finding the horror in humanity and using that as a way to build up his monsters.
For sure, Charles. And one of the defining quotes of The Witcher in general, I would say, and The Last Wish in particular, is where Geralt says, people like to invent monsters and monstrosities, then they seem less monstrous themselves.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I love that one. And there's also that quote, I don't have it in front of me, but Geralt is like, oh, I remember my first monster. And he's describing a human being, like a bandit who attacked a family. And the idea that his first monster wasn't a Kikimora or a Striga, it was a human being. And I think that's a pretty poignant moment in a book about a guy who kills monsters for money, is that his first monster was a human being.
For sure. And this thing comes up a lot where what something appears to be on the outside in The Witcher, and oftentimes things that appear monstrous, like Geralt himself, in the way that he's described in The Last Wish anyway, appears monstrous to those around him. Maybe not quite as much as some of the, not a Kikimora, but
Right.
people are definitely afraid of him. And even in that situation he describes where he saves that family, I think like there's a girl he saved, and she ends up like fainting, like vomiting
Right.
and fainting when Geralt comes close to her.
Right.
She's so scared of Geralt, who just killed a person.
Right.
Even if he killed a person who was doing a bad thing.
Right.
And she's really frightened of him, so she perceives him as a monster. So Geralt has to grapple with these questions of what makes a monster so much, because people are wondering if he's a monster. He's wondering if all sorts of often cursed creatures that he's interacting with are technically monsters, because he's not supposed to kill people, at least whenever possible.
Right.
And he's definitely not supposed to take money to kill people.
Right.
So,
and that's because how many scenes are there? There's countless scenes where he walks into a bar and people are like, get away, you twisted sorcerer. You'll do anything for money. You use magic. You're a blasphemer. Like your total existence is an affront to humanity, kind of a thing. And the fact that you'll just, like, people have problems with monsters and you're over here haggling, like all those kinds of things. He has to face that kind of prejudice every town he goes to. And that just adds to this element of the true evil in this world. And it's not as simple as just an evil creature whose nature is to be evil. It's nuanced and it's complex and it's permeated through everything that Geralt has to interact with, not just monsters, but the humans as well.
Well, Charles, you're bringing up evil here, and I want to chat about some lesser evil, which is one of the one of the short stories, and I would say my favorite short story from The Last Wish. And anyone who's seen the first episode of the Witcher Netflix TV series will be familiar with the story of Renfrey, who
Love that
is
story.
so good. And basically we're dealing with a princess who has potentially been cursed, who had been traumatized by a sorcerer trying to kill her because he sees her as an evil monster.
Right, because she was born under an ominous sign, like an eclipse or a black moon or whatever.
Exactly. And then she ends up living this pretty horrible, traumatic life that has her turning around and just really wanting vengeance upon Stragobor, the sorcerer who set her down this path instead of what her life could have been, which is a very pampered princess,
right,
who lives a very
life of
good
luxury.
Life. Yeah. So I mentioned this in our buddy read discussion of The Last Wish, that there's an amazing conversation between Geralt and Renfrey in The Last Wish, where he pretty much directly asks her, are you a monster? And Renfrey is someone who appears on the outside like just a woman. Like any
But Stragobor's convinced
person,
she's cursed. And she is
but
acting the way Stragobor says someone who is cursed would act. But she's acting that way because Stragobor caused her to lead this horrible, horrible life. And when she goes into all the stuff she had to endure, it's really heartbreaking, right? And it's almost scary in a way, like all the acts of violence and just all the victim that she was growing up that turned her into this hardened, vengeful person.
Or monster? Question mark.
Maybe.
So,
or was she always that way because she was born under the eclipse?
Raises some interesting questions about nature versus nurture, that or nature and nurture, because in psych these days we think of it more as those two working together. But the line from Renfrey is. Fine, I'm supposed to be cursed, contaminated in my mother's womb. I'm supposed to be, and Geralt interrupts, yes, and Renfrey finishes, a monster. Geralt asks, and are you? And she responds, I don't know, Geralt, because how am I to know, damn it? When I cut my finger, I bleed. I bleed every month, too. I get a bellyache when I overeat, and a hangover when I get drunk. When I'm happy, I sing, and I swear when I'm sad. When I hate someone, I kill them. And when... But enough of this. Your answer, Witcher. And she changes the subject back to, are you going to help me, or stand aside at least?
Right.
So she... And that's something I really like about The Witcher, the nuance of Renfrey actually being willing to be like, hey, I've known about this supposed curse my entire life, and I too think about this question, and I'm not sure. I wonder, I have all these signs of being human, but at the same time, I take vengeance upon people and take joy in that. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. And she doesn't know because she obviously is filled with this sense of self-preservation, and you could argue that it's, Stragobor would see her acts of violence as validation of his belief that all of these princesses, all these women of noble birth born under that eclipse were evil, and he's killed all of them and autopsied them or whatever except for her. And his pursuit of her since she was young is what she says has shaped her to be this way. So it's like, the cart before the horse kind of a thing. It's like, no, you killed my family, outcasted me, put me in the hands of thieves and brutes, and I had to grow up in the streets, and I was covered in lice and all this other stuff. She gets really, really into details, and it's disturbing, but it's an excellent read at the same time. And she's like, that's why I'm trying to kill you, So you feel for her. She's way more sympathetic than Stragobor, but the result is that she's willing to take a lot of innocent lives to get where she wants. And that's where Geralt had to step in. It wasn't that she was planning to kill Stragobor. Geralt was like, I get that, but you're going to need to put that aside if you want to, live a fulfilled life and avoid harming lots of people. And she's like, I know, but I can't. So...
Correct me if I'm wrong, Charles. Wasn't Geralt saying, though, even before all that he would be willing to step in to try to stop her from killing Stragobor, even just Stragobor, not just the innocent folks?
I think so. Because I think you're right on that. I don't think Geralt would have let her premeditatively murder anybody. I think that was the line Geralt had. Even though Stragobor is not the most sympathetic of victims when you get to know Renfrey's story and what he caused her to live through, Geralt is still if you try anything, I'm going to stop you. And he's begging her, right? He's like, please, just turn away and live your life. You've got a lot of talent. You've come this far. Don't cause all this violence. Don't force me to get involved. I don't want to choose. I'd prefer you just go away. And it's a lot to ask for her, after so much she's had to suffer through. And it's that idea of, what makes the monster in this case. Was it the eclipse, or was it the way she was brought up into the world. Who knows? And and we'll never know, because Sapkowski was very smart when Geralt did intervene and he killed Renfrey. Stregobor was like, excellent, nice job, let's do the autopsy. And he's like, you do not get to touch her at all. And we never know if she was truly cursed or not. And I think that's such a great move by the author, by Andrzej Sapkowski, to kind of keep that always as this mystery, because does it really matter? Because either way, she would have been justified, so whether she was cursed or not, her upbringing was so tragic that we feel for her that way.
We definitely do feel for her, Charles, with everything that she's been through. And it's interesting that Geralt does seem to have the opinion that whether someone is a monster or not a monster is, to some extent, a matter of choice on behalf of the person themselves. And I think that shows up in this story of the Lesser Evil, where I believe basically he tells Renfrey, hey, like, if you leave, then that's the way that you prove him wrong. That's the way that Stregobor is wrong, and you are not a monster, because you do not need to take revenge at all costs. In fact, you are able to forgive, and a monster wouldn't be capable of that. And I think from Geralt's point of view, and the reason that at the end of the day he decides, I guess this is kind of spoilery, but we did say some light spoilers, so earmuffs if you don't want to hear this. But he does decide that it's better to kill Renfrey than to.
I already said that, though.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I did say that.
Fair.
I
guess I.
So you should have put your spoiler phones on a while back, like 5 minutes ago. But
rewind back in time and don't listen to what Charles was saying.
Right. Like other people on the show. No, what I agree. That's a great moment, and you're exactly right. And Stregobor says something very interesting also, where he's like, because Geralt, the whole reason he got involved in this was because he had killed the Kikimora and was looking for someone who'd be willing to give him money for it. And it's like, oh, maybe the wizard will pay you some coins for it to make one of his crazy potions. And he's like, okay. And that's how he got involved. And then Stregobor's like, oh, perfect, you're here. Now you can help me kill this woman. And he's like, what? And he's like, Geralt, who's the real monster here? That Kikimora, that actual, what you would consider a monster, was just hunting for food and like surviving on animal instincts. Renfrey's out here murdering people indiscriminately on the path to revenge. He even actually says, like, who's the real monster? And that's just, or he says something like that anyway. And that's like the whole theme of that story. And that's what makes it such a highlight in The Last Wish.
Definitely a highlight there, Charles.
Thanks.
All right, if I just give you the last few words back, then I was listening.
Really makes me feel confident that you were listening to the whole thing. I don't know. People listening to this, look, it's interesting, right? This idea of a monster. It's a show about monster killers. And
local
it's not always the monster.
podcaster pleads with audience, yelling at them that their content is interesting.
This is interesting, people. It's the whole point of The Witcher.
Yeah.
So that's that story. What's the story called? The Lesser Evil. Yes, thank you. The only other one that I think is worth bringing up to contextualize this whole thing is the first one, which is called The Witcher, which is another one of my favorites. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because you have the other side, right? You have an actual monster. It's called a Striga. But it was created by these like really bizarre, horrible acts of like hateful acts of mankind, right? You have a prince or a king, and he through incest with his sister gets pregnant, and then the baby dies in childbirth, and the mom dies as well. And then you also have, I guess, spoilers here, you have other parties within the palace who had feelings for the princess and hated the prince and hated the child and all of this, and then the mom of the daughter hated that there was a product of incest. So like you had all this hate, all this betrayal, all of this, like the act of incest itself and the act of a young baby dying in childbirth and a mom dying in childbirth, which are very tragic things. It all kind of morphed together into personification of the Striga, this horrible monster that plagues the palace, right? And it's interesting that this monster stays within the confines of the palace as well and kind of like haunts everyone involved in it, right? It haunts the king, who's the only one left from that whole family that survived, and then the people in the palace who are trying to manipulate the situation for their own personal gain. They're constantly having to deal with this like creature that's basically in their closet. You know, it's a super interesting story about monsters, and the monster itself is just a child that didn't even get to live, right? It's the corpse of the child that turned into a monster. It's pretty dark stuff, but it's kind of innocent in a way, and it's the people around it, the circumstance, the evil deeds committed by the people around her, and the hate, and also the love and death that created it. So it's just a super interesting idea of what makes the monster in this case.
For sure, and you nailed the use of the word personification there.
Thank you,
Charles.
Yeah.
Well done. So I guess, so the monster or the Striga, I guess the way I was thinking about it was that it was the child itself. Like you're pitching it more as this kind of like thing that came out of just all of this, these circumstances, almost like out, and the corpse turned into it. I guess I never really understood the extent to which it actually is just the child that was like quote unquote lost in the pregnancy.
Right. I think they said it's
versus-
because they didn't burn the corpse. That was their mistake, right? They buried it or something like that, or they put it in the tombs, and that's what caused it to morph into the Striga,
Gotcha.
right? And there's the line from, I keep forgetting if he's a king or a prince, and I keep going back and forth.
I believe he's a king.
Okay.
You're saying
Yeah,
who
the
had
father, basically,
yeah.
where he's basically saying,
I believe he's a king.
did my, his words, did my Congress with my sister create this thing? And then Geralt says, I don't think so, but it was a cause of it, right? Where he's like, I don't think it's like how to make a Striga step one, have an incestuous relationship, I think it's just the raw emotion and like almost like betrayal of nature that is what spawned the creature. It's interesting. It's an interesting way to use fantasy to create monsters, right? This betrayal of nature, and then combine that with, they mentioned that one of the people in court had romantic feelings for the queen that went, then he had to watch her have a child with her brother, and that made him really upset. And there's that moment where he's being used as bait for the Striga, and he's like, Witcher, like, did I do this? Like, did my hate cause this? And he's like, I don't know. And he's like, Witcher, there's also the mom. She was super furious as well. She might have done something too. And it's like, he's like, okay. So it's basically, it was just so many, that whole situation was so messed up on so many different levels that it just spawned this killing machine.
Yeah, and I think to return to the question of what makes a monster here, I feel like in Geralt's view anyway, the way he thinks about this one is that he won't kill the Striga because the Striga has within it the potential to be, I want to say good, but at the very least not a
become
monster
human again, become a
anymore,
little
become
girl, an innocent
a
girl.
little girl. So it's like, if that is within this creature and there's a possibility to bring it out, then I'm not quite ready to say that this is just a cut and dry, that's a monster, so sure, I'll take money and I'll kill it.
Sure. And Geralt was
that's a
given
big thing, I
multiple
think.
opportunities to like kill it and not try and turn it, because trying to turn it is way more dangerous. And then there's also, he gets the opportunity he was going to get paid to just walk away, which he refuses to do. You know, he had many opportunities, and every perceivable option was presented to him as an out, right? But he chose to do the most difficult one, what can be perceived as the most honest one, which is spend the night with this monster, right? Survive the night with it, and it will change back. You know, it's interesting
Mhm.
that that's what it takes. One, it's part of the story, right? Like you have to make it to the third call of the crow or whatever,
Yeah.
or the
I
cock
think
or
it was a
whatever.
rooster.
Yeah, and then so it's like, is that part of it? Like this idea of I just thinking about now how interesting it was that it kind of was confined to the castle, kind of like in the back of people's minds almost. And then why is it that anybody that just is capable of spending the night with it would be able to just survive the night, be able to reverse the curse? You know, it's interesting. And
I
go ahead.
Yeah, I love that idea. I never thought about that before that you've brought up
It's
here
kind of like
of
facing it, I guess.
the Striga basically being this personification, like you said, of their sins.
Yeah, and even like
That
of their
is,
unfaced trauma or unfaced
yeah,
drama. Like you're the psych guy, but I imagine when you choose to ignore these horrible traumatic things that happen to you, they tend to fester and get worse, right? And sometimes
you're
the
spot
best
on there,
way
Charles,
of getting past them is by facing them, right? So, you
for
know,
sure.
I'm not pursuing a PhD in clinical psych, but
Neither am
that's
I.
kind of where I'm coming. Or
Counseling psych.
counseling psych. I'm not doing that either. But that's would be my guess as someone who reads. I don't know.
Who reads? Well, your reading has not led you astray here, Charles. Yeah, most of the empirically supported treatments for dealing with trauma focus on basically just a willingness to expose yourself to some of these thoughts and feelings and these kind of things that come up for you when you actually confront that a traumatic thing was something that happened to you. And yeah, it sucked, it's terrible, and it happened, and to try to come to accept or otherwise like trying to make sense or make meaning out of some traumatic things that have happened to people. That's how people are usually able to best recover, at least in treatment, from traumatic events. And I think you make a great point of the Striga almost being this thing that is lurking in the dark depths of the castle and is almost all this unhashed out interpersonal trauma that has played out between all of the inhabitants of that castle.
Right. And the cure is to face it and survive it, you know? So, you know, that's why I like recording these little episodes, because I was kind of piecing that together in my mind as I was talking through it just now. I think it's fun to go into these little micro topics because you get stuff out of the content that you may have perceived, but to talk through it, I think is super interesting. And it's just a testament to Andrzej Sapkowski's writing, especially in these short stories where he's able to draw on kind of folklore and storytelling, right? These kind of fables, and perceive it through this lens of modern fantasy and this like subverting this idea of monsters. And it creates something that is uniquely The Witcher that, I don't know, I just really love the whole concept.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's so much depth to these stories around those topics and themes, and that's part of why I'm really enjoying reading The Witcher.
Yeah, man. So what makes a monster? Who's to say?
If silver kills them,
Silver does
that's
kill
the
them.
answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't like silver.
Yeah, I was holding that till the end, but that's the answer. Thanks for staying tuned.
Well, it's what unmakes a monster.
That, Charles, don't spoil our next episode.
Oh, yeah. Then we're just really milking the Witcher content at that point.
Well, we got to get
if
you
this
some of
wasn't
that
enough.
song that you made, Charles.
Yeah, that's right.
Toss 5 stars to your podcast. I mean, anytime that we
Toss
get to play
5
that.
stars to your podcast, please. You don't want to hear me continue to sing and play guitar. Just toss the 5 stars. Oh, Internet of Plenty.
I want to keep hearing you sing, Charles. I think it's awesome.
I'll send you the file.
You know that's hidden social media. Probably long before this is released.
Yeah, I'm sure it already has and is doing quite well. Anything else to say about witchers and monsters before we roll ourselves out here?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more ground for us to tread here, but I also think that we'll get to keep having these kind of conversations.
Right.
As
I
we
think
move
by
forward with
picking
our
2
Witcher
of the
buddy
really
read.
early Witcher stories is a great way to kind of frame it. And it's like, look, as you continue to read The Witcher and the Witcher saga, it's these kinds of things are interesting to think about. And it's, yeah, we'll as we read Sword of Destiny, which we're going to read after we've recorded this, we can kind of frame that as, okay, how does this kind of theme of monsters continue? And it's exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well, Charles.
All right. Well, that's the outro music. Thank you, everybody, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard, toss 5 stars to your podcast. We've said it
Please
enough
do.
at this point. Yeah. So
With all the effort Charles has put in.
Come on. And then otherwise, you can hit us up on social media at the FTF Podcast. And we're the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end for Twitter. Shoot us an email if you have any other exciting thoughts about what makes a monster and the contents of the Witcher saga. Shoot us an email at ftfpodcast@gmail.com.
The FTF Podcast.
The FTF Podcast @gmail.com. THE. Yeah, that's it. Thanks again. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.